This will be the first of two videos in looking at natural law in action, coming from Aquinas. And the first one we're going to look at is Aquinas when he talks about why the notion of private property actually stems from natural law. Now, one thing I want to differentiate before we even get into this, and it's not specifically mentioned in the text, and I'll have a slideshow for this at our next meet to illustrate this. I want to talk about communism for a moment and the fact that Jesus was often said to be a communist. So first I need to talk about exactly what communism is before we get into this concept of private property. So the notion of communism, first of all, it's a state-organized economic endeavor where the state controls all elements of the economy. They control income, they control who's working where, in what jobs, how much the person's being paid, when they're working, when they get time off, where they live. They're controlling absolutely everything. States subsequently also owns all property. A person does not own anything. They simply receive what the state feels they deserve. Now, this is a concept of involuntary association. If you live in a communist state, you are part of that communist enterprise and you don't have a choice in the matter. You can't opt out of it. And most commonly in communist states, you can't even leave the state. So you don't even have the option of opting out by saying, I'm going to move to another country. They won't let you leave. Now, I'll let you consider what the consequences of this might be. We will talk about that during our next meet. Now, Jesus is often said to have been a communist because he owned no private property. He and the early Christians, the apostles and the disciples, they had no private property. They didn't own any land. They didn't own a home. They relied on the goodness of others to take care of them, and consequently, with no private property, they're said specifically to be communist. This technically is not correct. Jesus would be, and the early Christians would be engaged in what we would call communitarianism. Now, and it sounds a lot like communism, but there's some fundamental differences. Instead of the state being organized, there's a community of people who collectively organize to agree to these particular standards. If there is any property, it's owned in common by the community, and then consequently any income, anyone who earns any money, it is given then to the community, and then the community then proceeds to distribute the proceeds to the people who may be in need. Now, the key difference, this sounds a lot like communism, but the key difference is there's this concept. This is voluntary association. There are people who are involved in communitarian enterprises, but they choose to be there. And they agree with the goals of the community typically before going in. And if they end up not wanting to be part of the communitarian enterprise anymore, they can leave. It's entirely a voluntary association, so the consequences are substantially different. And anytime anyone says Jesus was a communist, you need to hit him in the face with this. Jesus didn't specifically condemn private property. But we look to him for an example and state, well, perhaps there ought not to be any private property. Again, the key to this is voluntary association. Now, Aquinas proceeded to argue that there are good reasons for why that there is private property. And in looking at the text, if you look at page 193 on the inset, it'll show you those three reasons. One, everyone is more concerned to tend to something that belongs to them. In short, if you own the thing, then you tend to take better care of it. I want you to picture a community car, let's say. Let's say there's a fleet of 3 cars that are simply maintained by the neighborhood, okay? And the neighborhood has like 10 different families in there. Who takes care of the car? Now, it's conceivable you might all collectively get together and state, well, on Monday it's going to be Joe, and then on Tuesday it's going to be Jane, and on Wednesday it's going to be Joseph or James or whatever. And you may subsequently agree to that, but do people take as good a care of it, knowing other people are going to be driving it and abusing it, as if it's actually their own car? This tends not to happen. People tend to take better care of things that actually belong to them. So that is Aquinas' first indication that private property actually isn't such a bad idea. It's a natural consequence of human behavior. The second is human affairs self-organize better when the proper care of something is a matter of personal responsibility. And this is slightly different. But probably the best way to describe this sort of thing is is to use the following maxim: when something is everyone's job, then the job never gets done. If you doubt this, I want you to consider group projects. Why do you hate these things so much? Part of the reason is because not everyone pulls their own weight. That's more or less what Aquinas is talking about here. Okay? Affairs tend to get more equally organized when people have a specific responsibility that is theirs, and then they proceed to do that particular job. Now, that's not to say that they can't help others that might be in need or anyone else who calls for assistance. But a job that is in actual individuals tends to get done better than group projects. Then finally, the third concept that Aquinas brings up, and again it's on that inset, page 193, is that peace is better preserved when people are content with their own property. If someone has a piece of property and a home and things within that home that allow them to meet their needs, they're not going to be looking at their neighbor and going, I want that. They have that, I need that, I'm going to take that from them, and then you're going to have a struggle. Okay? Violence often breaks out in these circumstances. So those three concepts, and Aquinas said, none of this is written down. God didn't write this down, Scripture didn't write this down, tradition didn't write this down. Aquinas simply came about from watching humans at work. And the rules just kind of present themselves. And so he outlined them, but no humanity, not even Aquinas himself, he didn't make the rule. Humanity didn't make the rule. It's just something that happened. Okay? It's part of the organization of human behavior. And Aquinas then stated, from this we can conclude that it's really kind of ideal for people to actually obtain their own property. Now, does this mean that people should subsequently obtain all the property that they possibly can? The news today states that Jeff Bezos is set to become the world's first trillionaire. Now, an argument might be made that no one needs that sort of wealth, and we can get into some of the finer points of discussion about whether we ought to have billionaires or trillionaires. I'm not so interested in getting into that. I think Aquinas' main point about this sort of thing is that in the pursuit of private property, a human, man or woman, needs to obtain sufficient property so that they can get their daily needs met. If you're striving for something beyond that, then it is probably disordered. Now note, you'll be getting into a violation of Aristotelian virtue, okay, erring too far on one side. If you're sitting there trying to get all the money and all the things, because that also incites envy sometimes in your neighbors, and you want to avoid that. So Aquinas was not stating that in the pursuit of private property, then it's natural for people to pursue to obtain as much property as possible. He wasn't saying that. He never said that. And there's a second caveat that comes into this. Is it ever actually okay to steal? Is it okay to impinge on someone else's private property? And Aquinas would state that the term is in extremis. In extreme situations, it actually is potentially okay. Consider the following circumstance. In 2006, 2007, whatever it was, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and just completely devastated the city. And to boot, not only did the hurricane itself do all sorts of damage, it broke a couple of levees and caused a great deal of New Orleans to get severely flooded. So people suddenly, this flood was so extreme that a lot of people had to retreat to the roofs of their houses, where suddenly the temperature now is 95 degrees. The flooded water is unpotable. You can't drink it. All their goods have been flooded and therefore rendered useless. And care wasn't immediately coming in. Sometimes people were 3, 4, 5, 6 days in this circumstance before relief came in. So in this circumstance, would it be all right for someone to trudge up the road to a slightly higher section of property that wasn't as badly flooded, and you find a grocery store that's been shut down and barricaded because of the hurricane? Can you go in there and take some food because all your food's been destroyed? Aquinas would say absolutely. Certainly, you can do that sort of thing. The question then stems, can you take anything you want? I can show you videos of folks during Katrina, the aftermath of Katrina, going into Best Buy, hauling away sneakers. I mean, like 10 pairs of sneakers, and not to mention high-definition televisions. Now, does anyone need a high-definition television to live in a moment of extremity? The answer, of course, is no. TVs don't assist you in living from day to day. Food and potable water do. So the way Aquinas would frame this sort of thing is that the store owner has private property, and people should not be allowed to go in there and simply break in and take what they want without paying. But in a period of extreme circumstance where it's literally potentially a matter of life and death, might it be licit for the person to go in and take things? And the answer is yes. Now note, this is in extremis. This doesn't mean I'm hungry, therefore I get to take that bag of peanuts. It's different than what was described in the circumstance I'm giving you, Katrina, and I'll give you another example at our next meet. And I'm pretty sure that is it with regards to private property. Right, we're going to skip this section on polygamy, and then the next one is going to talk about the notion of the death penalty and whether that is okay or not, and how the argument regarding the death penalty stems from natural law rather than any revealed or positive law, and that will be coming up next. See ya.